Hotel World. This your brother, Matthew Daniels, aka I'm Pooh, aka the Chosen Few, aka the real bookworm. I'm not a bookworm, world. I'm the real bookworm. Make sure you get it right. And as always, world, may your name live on forever and may your memory never die. Hotel, cheers to that. Um, I know y'all saw the title, so you can already tell kind of where this video is going to be going. We're going to be talking about the black codes, right? Now before I tell you what the black codes is, some of you may already know. Now, if you already know what the black codes are, this is going to be a very interesting video. And if you don't know what the black codes are, this is going to be a very interesting video because what I learned is sometimes we research things, we Google things, we look things up on the internet, we read books about certain topics, we may interact with people who has information on certain topics, and we may be able to ask them questions and get answers, right? But a lot of times when you hear the information, or when you get the information from someone that's actually close to the source of the information, the closer you get to the source of the information, a lot of times the more impactful the things that you find out are. Now, I'm going to be talking about the black codes primarily because this is the book that I'm reading as of late, right? Black Reconstruction in America by W.E.B. Du Bois, and it's covering the time period between 1860 and 1880. Now, I haven't finished this book yet, and I do it sometimes, but I rarely going to do a video about a book that I'm reading without either reading the majority of it or already having some kind of idea about the information that it's talking about. But this time I'm not gonna lie. A lot of this information that W.E.B. Du Bois is breaking down is kind of new to me, right? Some of the specifics of it, and hearing it from somebody that was so close to the actual events in their life, um, um, like I mentioned earlier, it makes it a lot more impactful. So when I was reading it, I was at work. I take it to work with me, and I read it before I clock in. I'll read it on my breaks when I come home. I'll read some before I go to sleep. And I was reading about the black codes, right? And uh, it it had such a profound impact on me. You know, when I heard it from the mouth of W.E.B. Du Bois describing some of the black codes, and he was describing what they were, and I guess it had a lot to do with how the information had already built up to that point where you could clearly see how the quote unquote black codes were in essence a way for the individuals in the South, in the Confederacy, after they had lost the Civil War. You could see how it was totally designed to make the African Americans a slave in everything but name, and to make the Europeans in the South the masters in everything but name. Um, so this is going to be interesting. This is going to be interesting. Okay. So before I get into it, I just want to read to you what the black codes are. for those of you who don't know, and for those of you who do know but would like to brush up on it a little bit, I'm going to read what the black codes are, and then we're going to go into Black Reconstruction in America by W.E.B. Du Bois, and we're going to read what he has to say about some of these black codes. So follow with me. Black code in U.S. history, any of numerous laws enacted in the states of the former Confederacy after the American Civil War and intended to assure the continuance of white supremacy. Enacted in 1865 and 1866, the laws were designed to replace the social controls of slavery that had been removed by the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. The black codes had their roots in the slave codes that had formerly been in effect. The premise behind chattel slavery in America was that slaves were property, and as such, they had few or no legal rights. The slave codes, in their many loosely defined forms, were seen as effective tools against slave unrest, particularly as a hedge against uprising and runaways. Enforcement of slave codes also varied, but corporal punishment was widely and harshly employed. So I want you to put yourselves into the context of what we're about to read. This is right after the Civil War. The Confederate states who were in rebellion, who tried to secede from the Union, they had just effectively lost the war. The Emancipation Proclamation had been signed. It had been put into effect, and it, maybe not totally in practice, right? But in word, at least. And I ideally, the enslaved people were now free. Now I know there's a lot that goes into that, but technically, the enslaved people were now free. But the people in the South, right, the ones who were primarily fighting against the North and were fighting tooth and nail to hold on to slavery in the South, right? Once they realized that they were defeated and that it was technically slavery was technically illegal at this point, right? What they did was let me cut this off. What they did, excuse me, was they used the law in order to basically keep the African Americans subjected into a state very, very similar, almost exactly as slavery. So they were using these black codes to enslave the people who had just got their freedom. That's why you have to be real leery of laws and legislations and ordinances and codes and stuff like that, because people traditionally use those types of things to oppress. So if you don't keep your eyes on the prize, anything can happen to you. And one of the main things that they were doing at that time, it was a big debate about what they was calling Negro suffrage. Suffrage is like the right to vote, the ability to vote, and they were adamantly suppressing the African Americans' ability to vote so that they could enact these laws to keep them in servitude, and they would have no way of changing these laws because they couldn't even vote. They couldn't vote on bills being passed. They couldn't vote on governors and senators, and they couldn't even vote on legislators. So without the right to vote, with these individuals trying to enact these laws that were going to keep them in the servitude. They were basically slaves again and everything but name. So where we're going to start, let me see. I think I want to start right here on page 167. W.E.B. Du Bois writes, making every allowance for the excitement and turmoil of war and the mentality of a defeated people, the black codes were infamous pieces of legislation. Let us examine these codes in detail. They covered, naturally, a wide range of subjects. First, there was the question of allowing Negroes to come into the state. In South Carolina, the Constitution of 1865 permitted the legislature to regulate immigration, and the consequent law declared, this is what the law said, that no person of color shall migrate into and reside in this state unless within 20 days after his arrival within the same he shall enter into a bond with two freeholders as sureties and a penalty of $1,000 conditioned for his good behavior and for his support. So right off the bat, in some places they were saying that the Negro, the African American, they couldn't even come into particular states within 20 days of being in that state, signing some kind of formal contract with the white people that were already there. And you're going to see that a lot of those contracts were basically centered around them actually doing work for this individual, and the obligations of the contract in essence made him a slave. So you can't even come into this state without subjecting yourself to slavery and everything. But name is what you're going to see. Watch this. Especially in the matter of work was the Negro narrowly restricted. In South Carolina, he must be especially licensed if he was to follow on his own account any employment, except that of former or servant. Those licensed must not only prove their fitness, but pay an annual tax ranging from $10 to $100. Under no circumstances could they manufacture or sell liquor. Licenses for work were to be granted by a judge and were revocable on complaint. The penalty was a fine double the amount of the license, one half of which went to the informer. Mississippi provided that every freedman, free Negro, and mulatto shall on the second Monday of January 1866, 1866, the year, and annually thereafter have a lawful home or employment, and shall have written evidence thereof from the mayor or from a member of the board of police, which licenses may be revoked for cause at any time by the authority granting the same. Detailed regulation of labor was provided for in nearly all these states. Louisiana passed an elaborate law in 1865 to regulate labor contracts for agricultural pursuits. Later, it was denied that this legislation was actually enacted, but the law was published at the time, and the Constitutional Convention of 1868 certainly regarded this statute as law, for they formally repealed it. The law required all agricultural laborers to make labor contracts for the next year within the first 10 days of January. So for one of the things, they made a law that said within the first 10 days of January, you have to sign a contract with somebody saying that you would work for this person for at least a full year. So within the first 10 years of January, you had to guarantee your labor to somebody for a full year. That full year, you had to sign yourself over to somebody. And these stipulations on these contracts, as you're going to see, were crazy, but they were forced to do so. The contracts to be in writing, to be with the heads of families, to embrace the labor of all the members, and to be binding on all minors thereof. Each laborer, after choosing his employer, shall not be allowed to leave his place of employment until the fulfillment of his contract, unless by consent of his employer or on account of harsh treatment or breach of contract on the part of the employer. And if they do so leave without cause or permission, they shall forfeit all wages earned to the time of abandonment. So within the first 10 days of January, you had to find somebody to work for. You had to agree to work for that person for a full year. And if you didn't work for that person for the full year, everything that you had been paid up until that point, you owed them back. And they wrote into the law that, oh, you could leave the employer because of harsh treatment. But the trick about that, is you're going to see as we go further, is that the Negro couldn't even really bring charges against a white man in court. You could, technically, but in a lot of these instances, let's say an African American brings a charge against a white person, right? One of the black codes that we're going to get into, it stated that if you brought the charge against a white person and the white person was found to be innocent, right, then you were to receive punishment. So you could be right, and you could be dead to the rights, and you could take this person to court, but then that judge or that person overseeing the case, they're a racist, right? They still have that mentality that was in the Confederacy, that was in the South, that there are no laws or there were no rights that a Negro has that a white man must respect or honor. This is how they thought. So you weren't going to win in court, So if you brought them to court, you were just going to be punished. So within 10 days, you had to sign a contract to work with somebody for a year. And one of the first stipulations is you can't leave your place of employment. You're stuck to the plantation. Just what it is. And you have to do this within 10 days. And if you go into certain states, within 20 days of being in that state, you got to sign up for something like this. So anywhere you go, you are funneled directly to the plantation for a year. But then when that year is up, you have to do the same thing again. So it's going to be perpetual. It's going to be non-ending, never ending. Slave in everything but name. He goes on to say, in case of sickness of the laborer, wages for the time lost shall be deducted. And where the sickness is feigned for purposes of idleness, and also should refusal to work be continued beyond 3 days, the offender shall be reported to a justice of the peace, and shall be forced to labor on roads, levees, and other public works without pay until the offender consents to return to his labor. So if you get sick, you don't got to go to work. But if they believe that you're faking like you're sick, you get punished, right? And even if you are sick, you only get 3 days. Within 3 days, you have to be back at work. Now, if you're faking sick, or if you're gone for more than 3 days, right? Or you don't want to work, or they're saying that you don't want to work, that you're pretending that you're sick, but you're really sick, then guess what? You get snatched up by the justice of the peace, and then you're forced to work without pay on roads, levees, and other public works. Work without pay is slavery, right? So you're forced into slavery if you get sick, right? Or you're sick for more than 3 days, you're forced into labor you're forced into slavery until you agree to return to work for that employer, until you get your behind back on that plantation. These were the black codes. This is what our ancestors had to live under. Man, one day I'm gonna go into it. I built my family tree. I went all the way back to 1848. I found one of my ancestors that was born in 1848, and I have documentation of what he was doing, where he was at in 1867. This is when this was going on. And he was in Alabama, so I read some things about what was going on in Alabama, and it was amazing to me because I got a glimpse at how my ancestor was living and how a lot of our ancestors was living. And I was seeing how in the South, how they were funneled right back into slavery. Sick for more than 3 days, you forced to work without pay until you decide to go back. And then all of the time that you missed from your employer on the plantation, right? You have to work until that money is paid off. Whatever they say you owe them, you have to work for free until it's paid off, or get your wages taxed. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. The black codes. If you never knew about the black codes, just stick with me. Hang out with me. It get deep. I'm gonna make this video. When in health, right? Because we was talking about when an individual gets sick, and W.E.B. Du Bois is actually quoting what was the laws, what was on the books, the black codes. He's not making this up. Yeah, he's giving commentary on certain things, but when I'm reading what these laws are, these are quotations, and then I'm going into a lot of my own commentary. So a lot of the stuff that you're hearing, this is exactly what the law said. Slavery and everything but name. When in health, the laborer shall work 10 hours during the day in summer and 9 hours during the day in winter, unless otherwise stipulated in the labor contract. He shall obey all proper orders of his employer or his agent, take proper care of his work mules, horses, oxen, stock, also of all agricultural implements. And employers shall have the right to make a reasonable deduction from the laborer's wages for injuries done to animals or agricultural implements committed to his care, or for bad or negligent work. So if a pack animal, or a work animal, a horse, a mule, an oxen, gets hurt while you're on the supposed to be job, you have to pay for that. Right? If they feel like you did bad work, you have to pay for that. If they're not satisfied with your work, if they feel like you was neglecting some of your work, you have to pay for that. If the tools that you're using, if it works down and it breaks, you have to pay for that. And how you gonna pay for it? By working for free. It's just the way to fund it. And then all it would take is just the person that you're working for. They just have to say it. You just have to say it happened. And then the justice of the peace or the judges, they're going to side with them. This is the landscape. They're gonna side with them automatically. So how many people ended up working for free because they said they did bad or shabby work, or because they said the horse got hurt, so then they got to pay for the horse. The mule got hurt, so then they got to pay for the mule. People are taking advantage of this. Excuse me. People are taking advantage of this. They created it so they could take advantage of it. Of course, the Confederate States wanted to keep slavery. So when they were forced, with the outcome of the Civil War, they decided to legalize the slavery with laws, and they just they just worked around it. So their whole intent was to put the Negro back into slavery, and so they did it with legislation, and they did it by keeping the African American, the Negro, keeping him away from suffrage, keeping him from being able to vote. This is why a lot of times, especially around right now, presidential elections and stuff like that, people always talk about how important it is to vote, how important it is to vote, how important it is to vote. I'm one of those individuals. I agree that it is important to vote, right? But I understand the thinking of individuals that don't want to involve themselves with the political process because they feel like it's not going to matter anyway. But what I think they overlook a lot of times is the fact that it could be a lot worse, right? And when someone else is totally allowed to make the rules and regulations, and it's a possibility that that person that's making the rules and regulations and the laws have a negative view of you, and you let them make the laws without your input, you get black codes. Or you get something something similar, the equivalent of it today. Technically they wouldn't be able to call it black codes, but people still use legislation to exert their crazy ideals. They do that today. Anyone who would deny that, you're just ill-informed. You're ill-informed. So I agree with voting African American suffrage. I agree with it. I'm not gonna debate it, but you see what happens when you don't. He goes on to say, stay with me. Bad work, bad work shall not be allowed. Failing to obey reasonable orders, neglect of duty, and leaving home without permission will be deemed disobedience. Obey. You must obey. If you leave your home without permission of your employer, it's disobedience and you will be punished. You will be punished harshly. Crazy, man. For any disobedience, a fine of $1 shall be imposed on the offender. So for any disobedience, you do anything they don't like, that's $1. Do something else, that's $1. You do something else, that's $1. Do something else, that's $1. You rack that up, end of the week, you ain't getting paid nothing because you owe it all. You're not getting paid nothing because you owe it all. And then there's nobody that you can go to get justice because the people who make the rules were just as racist. For all lost time from work hours, unless in case of sickness, the laborer shall be fined 25 cents per hour. For all absence from home without leave, the laborer will be fined at the rate of $2 per day. Now imagine that. Like let's say nowadays, right? You call out from work, yeah, you don't get paid. And if you call out too many times, you can't get fired. But imagine if you called out from work, and not only do you don't get paid, but then your employer says that, okay, you missed 8 hours of work yesterday. Ample. You missed 8 hours of work. Chosen few. You missed 8 hours of work. Real bookworm. So you owe me. Not only am I not going to pay you, but you owe me. Imagine your employer telling you, you call out. They're like, okay, you ain't going to come for that 8 hours. Well, guess what? You owe me $2 per day. Now, $2 back then was a lot of money. So let's say your employer tell you, okay, if you don't come to work, you owe me $80. What? You don't come to work, you owe me $50. What? Not only am I not gonna pay, you owe me $50. This is what this is. These are the black codes. If you didn't know what the black codes are, stick with me. It may take some time. I know I like to cut off, and I know I like to give commentary, and I know I like to talk, but I want you guys to feel what's actually being said. I want to give it time to sink in. I want to give it time to sink in. Imagine your employee, you call out, they tell you owe them $50, plus you don't get paid. It's bananas, man. Let's move on. Okay, he says, laborers will not be required to labor on the Sabbath except to take the necessary care of stock and other property on plantations and do the necessary cooking and household duties unless by special contract. So at least they wasn't making you work on the Sabbath, right? Unless it was, necessary stuff. You get your Sabbath, Saturday. For all thefts of the laborers from the employer of agricultural products, hogs, sheep, poultry, or any other property of the employer, or willful destruction of property or injury, the laborer shall pay the employer double the amount of the value of the property stolen, destroyed, or injured. One half to be paid to the employer and the other half to be placed in the general fund provided for in this section. No livestock shall be allowed to laborers without the permission of the employer. So they put you in this position where they can pay you nothing. And they put you in this position where on top of paying you nothing, they can put you in the debt, right? So naturally, what would an individual do in that type of a situation? If you don't have no money to eat, if you don't have no money to feed your family, and you're not going to be getting paid for your work, the work that you perform next week because you're in debt, people steal. So now they're saying, so now that they know they're gonna put you in this position where you're starving and your family's starving and you have no money and you're in debts, where when you do get money you have to pay it to him back, right? If you steal, which would be the natural reaction, you owe double the price of what you steal. So if you steal something that's worth $10, you worth 20. If you steal something that's worth $10, you have to pay back 20. You know? So now, if you had to steal it, you don't have that type of money. So now you're in debt $20 more. So now you're further behind the 8 ball. And this is why you hear the term sharecropping, where Negroes would work for other Negroes who had the ability to own land, so that they could go into contract with somebody to do work, and they could work for them, but they wouldn't get the harsh treatment of these black codes, and they could actually try to come up. That's what my ancestor did. In 1867, he shout out to the ancestor Thomas Daniels Sr. Right? I'm Matthew Daniels. That's the first, the oldest Daniels that I've been able to find in my direct lineage. From all the way down to my father and me. That's a direct line to this guy I'm telling you about. So in 1867, he joined the Union Army in Alabama. He turned up in Texas. He signed up for 3 years. So in 1870, he showed up in Texas, and he was working for an individual with the last name McGee in Texas. This dude owned land, and he was working the land for him. He lived with him, right? So this was sharecropping. And the individual that named McGee that he was working for, this guy was so old. He was born in the 1700s. My ancestor was born in 1848. This guy was born in the 1700s. So I don't know how he acquired what he acquired. I don't really know where he was from. A lot of those records are murky. I got to do more research. But he worked for him until he got on his feet. So that was in 1870, right? I have some documents in 1880. Well, my ancestor, Thomas Daniels Sr., he owned land, and he had a family, he had a wife, he had children, and he had another individual, I can't recall his name right now, who was doing sharecropping. He was working for him on his land. And so, that's just how they did it to avoid these black codes. So some of these black codes, it appears that my ancestor was able to avoid by working for someone like him, another Negro. Well, he was a mulatto, but that's half Negro anyway, and so he was able to avoid some of this. But he goes on to say, what am I going on? Yeah, boy, man, this get crazy, family. Laborers shall not receive visitors during work hours. So how sometimes you at work, and your wife or your husband, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, whatever you're doing, they may be out and about, pass by your job, stop up there, hey, how you doing? No visitors during work hours. Imagine somebody telling you that, like, nah, they can't stop by, man. Look, I was the general manager for McDonald's for years. Now, if we busy, we busy, we got a line wrapped around the drive-through, your family come in, you know what I mean? I may be like, yeah, all right, let's just get this line down a little bit. Then if it's something important, you can go out there and talk to them for a minute, or you go on break, you can go talk to them. But no visitors during work hours, and you get punished if somebody come up there, slave and everything but name, man. All difficulties arising between the employers and laborers under this section shall be settled, and all fines be imposed by the former. If not satisfactory to the laborers, an appeal may be had to the nearest justice of the peace and two freeholders, citizens, one of said citizens to be selected by the employer and the other by the laborer, and all fines imposed and collected under this section shall be deducted from the wages due, and shall be placed in a common fund to be divided among the other laborers employed on the plantation at the time when their full wages fall due, except as provided for above. So basically what he just said was, let's say the laborer and the employer have a dispute. They say that something happened, you owe them money, you're saying that you don't, and they can't settle it. Now, you bring it before a justice of the peace, or you bring it before somebody that's in charge who can make a judgment. And the employer, he would have to, bring his own witness or whatever, and the laborer, he would have to bring his own witness. So it'll probably be, a white man bringing a white man, a Negro bringing a Negro, and then, they would have to go and try to get some kind of judgment, some type of determination. But again, he's going to explain it a little later. But the problem with that is the person that you present your case to, right? The person that you present your case to is more than likely going to be on the side of the white man as opposed to the Negro. That's the problem with that. So he goes on to say similar detailed regulations of work were in the South Carolina law. Elaborate provisions was made for contracting colored servants to white masters. Their masters were given the right to whip moderately servants under 18. So if you were under 18 and you were working for somebody, you could still be whipped. You could be whipped. Slavery and everything but name. Others were to be whipped on authority of judicial order. So if you were under 18, you could be whipped on GP. If you were over 18, right, you could be whipped, but you had to get judicial orders. And 9.99999 times out of 10, the judicial orders, the judicial authorities would allow them to whip you. So you under these black codes, you could still be whipped. Ain't that something? Think about that. Black codes, man. These officers were given authority to return runaway servants to their masters. Look at the language W.E.B. Du Bois used. Runaway servants to their masters. Runaway employees. You think you working at McDonald's, right? You don't like working for McDonald's. You think you gonna quit? You think you gonna leave? Nah, they can come get you and bring you back. You working for Office Depot. You tired of receiving these orders. You tired of taking the crap off these customers. You think you're gonna leave? No, you in retail. You know how people work these retail jobs. They get fed up with their retail job, and they walk off. They F this, I'm out. You leave. Police come knock on your door. Hey, and they drag you back up there to the retail store. Crazy. The servants, on the other hand, were given certain rights. Now, let's check this out. Their wages and period of service must be specified in writing, and they were protected against unreasonable tasks, Sunday and night worship, unauthorized attacks on their persons, and inadequate food. So it look like you got nights off, and look like you got Sunday off. These good Christians, you ain't got to work on Sunday. Contracting Negroes were to be known as servants and contractors as masters. So even in the black code, the legal language for the Negroes who were contracting work, who were trying to get work, they were classified as servants. And the people that they were classified as masters. Why would they put this language in there? Wages were to be fixed by the judge unless stipulated. Negroes of 10 years of age or more without a parent living in the district might make a valid contract for a year or less. So 10-year-olds could work. Failure to make written contracts was a misdemeanor, punishable by a fine of $5 to $50. Farm labor to be from sunrise to sunset with intervals for meals. Servants to rise at dawn, to be careful of master's property and answerable for property lost or injured. Lost time was to be deducted from wages. Food and clothes might be deducted. Servants were to be quiet and orderly and to go to bed at reasonable hours. No night work or outdoor work in bad weather was to be asked except in cases of necessity. Visitors not allowed without the master's consent. Servants leaving employment without good reason must forfeit wages. Masters might discharge servants for disobedience, drunkenness, disease, absence, etc. Enticing away the services of a servant was punishable by a fine of $20 to $100. A master could command a servant to aid him in defense of his own person, family, or property. Now, get this, they could force you to defend them and their property. So, you working for this guy, right? Someone attacks him, he can, if he demands that you protect him and that you fight for him, that you open yourself up to be injured in the defense of this guy. If you refuse, then you can be punished. You could be punished, fined, whipped, you know, killed. It's crazy. They can force you to defend them. Nah, bro. If somebody want to put them hands on you, I'm not getting in the way. These were the black codes. If you never knew about the black codes, check them out, man. House servants. Damn. House servants at all hours of the day and night and at all days of the week must answer promptly all calls and execute all lawful orders. Slavery in everything but name. The right to sell foreign products without written evidence from employer was forbidden in South Carolina. In some other states, a person of color who is in the employment of a master engaged in husbandry shall not have the right to sell any corn, rice, peas, wheat, or other grain, any flour, cotton, fodder, hay, bacon, fresh meat of any kind, poultry of any kind, animals of any kind, or any other product of a form without having written evidence from such master or some person authorized by him, or from the district judge or a magistrate that he has the right to sell such product. There were elaborate laws covering the matter of contracts for work. A contract must be in writing, and usually, as in South Carolina, white witnesses must attest it and a judge approve it. In Florida, contracts were to be in writing, and failure to keep the contracts by disobedience or impudence was to be treated as vagrancy. In Kentucky, contracts were to be in writing and attested by a white person, and if the laborer stopped work, his wages were to be forfeited for a year. He could be arrested, and the fee for his arrest must be paid by the employer and taken out of his wages. So if you do something and you get arrested, the person that you work for has to pay the fine, and then you have to work for that person for free to work off the fine. There were careful provisions to protect the contracting employer from losing his labor. In Alabama, now this hits close to home because this is where my direct ancestor was at during this time. In Alabama, when any laborer or servant having contracted as provided in the first section of this act shall afterward be found before the termination of said contract in the service or employment of another, that fact shall be prima facie evidence that such person is guilty of violation of this act. If he fail and refuse to forthwith discharge the said laborer or servant after being notified and informed of such former contract and employment. So at the end of the Civil War, he was in Alabama, and I know that he signed up for the Army in 1867. So that's 2 years in Alabama, ultimately living under these black codes, right? Which is why he probably joined the Army in the first place, make a living. Mississippi provided that every civil officer shall and every person may arrest, and carry back to his or her legal employer any freed man, free Negro, or mulatto who shall have quit the service of his or her employer before the expiration of his or her term of service without good cause. And said officer and person shall be entitled to receive for arresting and carrying back every deserting employee aforesaid the sum of $5.10 per mile for the place of arrest to the place of delivery, and the same shall be paid by the employer and held as a set-off for so much against the wages of said deserting employee. So if a Negro ran off on their work in Mississippi, for sure, any police officer, right, or any other white person could capture them and take them back to their employer. It's like slave catcher. Same thing. It just said employer, but the slave catcher. They could take them back to the employer. Right? Now the employer would have to pay them a certain amount for every mile that they had to bring them back. And now that individual that was just brought back would have to work for free until he paid off the fine. And he would have to work for free until he paid for the time that he missed. Almost impossible to come out of debt at that point. These are the black codes. It was provided in some states, like South Carolina, that any white man, whether an officer or not, could arrest a Negro. Anybody. Citizen's arrest. This the original citizen's arrest. Anybody could arrest you. Didn't even have to be a cop. George Zimmerman, you know. Upon view of a misdemeanor committed by a person of color, any person present may arrest the offender and take him before a magistrate to be dealt with as the case may require. In case of a misdemeanor committed by a white person toward a person of color, listen to this. In case of a misdemeanor committed by a white person toward a person of color, any person may complain to a magistrate who shall cause the offender to be arrested and according to the nature of the case to be brought before himself or be taken for trial in the district court. That's what would happen if a white person committed a crime against a colored person, right? On the other hand, in Mississippi, it was dangerous for a Negro to bring a white person to court on any charge. Why? In every case, now this is the law, the black code. In every case where any white person has been arrested and brought to trial by virtue of the provisions of the 10th section of the above recited act in any court in this state, upon sufficient proof being made to the court or jury upon the trial before said court, that any freedman, free Negro, or mulatto has falsely and maliciously caused the arrest and trial of said white person or persons, the court shall render up a judgment against said free man, free Negro, or mulatto for all cost of the case and impose a fine not to exceed $50 and imprisonment in the county jail not to exceed 20 days. And for a failure of said freedman, free Negro, or mulatto to pay, or cause to be paid all costs, fines, and jail fees, the sheriff of the county is hereby authorized and required, after giving 10 days public notice, to proceed to hire out at public outcry, slave auction block, at the courthouse of the county, said freedman, free Negro, or mulatto, for the shortest time to raise the amount necessary to discharge said freedman, free Negro, or mulatto from all costs, fines, and jail fees aforesaid. So if a Negro brought a case against a white man, even if he was right, and the judge ruled in the white man's favor, then now the Negro would have to pay the court cases, he would have to pay the fine or whatever he was trying to accuse the white man of. And if he couldn't pay, right? If he couldn't pay, then they would basically sell him into slavery. They would force him. They would hold an auction basically, and anybody who like, let's say owed $50, and somebody was like, hey, if he worked for me for 3 weeks, I'll pay the $50. And somebody else was like, you know what, if he worked for me for 2 weeks, I'll pay the $50. And it's like, all right, sold. 2 weeks, $50, bam. They'll give you to them, and you gotta work the 2 weeks for the $50 to pay off the fine. So a lot of times, even when Negroes were done wrong, they weren't bringing a white man to court because they weren't going to get the judgment. And when they didn't get the judgment, they were going to be punished. So they were done wrong, and then if they tried to address the wrong, they would be done worse. These are the black codes. Mississippi declared that any freed man, free Negro, or mulatto committing riots, routs, affrays, trespasses, malicious mischief, and cruel treatment to animals, seditious speeches. Everybody talk reckless on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and TikTok now. Seditious. There wasn't no freedom of speech with these black codes. Seditious speeches, insulting gestures. People flick the bird. That's insulting gesture. Language or acts or assaults on any person, disturbance of the peace, exercising the functions of a minister of the gospel without a license from some regularly organized church. So you couldn't even go out there and spread the good word. You couldn't even go out there and preach the Bible without a valid license. Well, that was a criminal offense. You know how sometimes people just wake up and they, I've been called to preach, and they want to do what they feel like the Lord called them to do. Illegal. You couldn't just be called to preach. Illegal. Black code. Vending spirituous or intoxicating liquors or committing any other misdemeanor, the punishment of which is not specifically provided for by law, shall, upon conviction thereof in the county court, be fined not less than $10 and not more than $100, and may be imprisoned at the discretion of the court, not exceeding 30 days. So you flick somebody the bird, you can go to jail and be fined. You seditious speeches, you say something that somebody don't like hearing, or you speak against the black code, you can be in prison, and you can be fined. Calling yourself a pastor without a valid license, trying to preach the Bible, you can go to jail and you can be fined. Then they say anything else that's not even mentioned in here, anything that they feel like is a crime, you can go to jail and you can be fined. You breathe too hard, you look too hard, you raise your voice, you can be jailed, and you can be jailed, in prison, and you can be fined. As to other civil rights, the marriage of Negroes was for the first time recognized in the southern states, and slave marriages legalized. South Carolina said in general that the statutes and regulations concerning slaves are now inapplicable to persons of color, and although such persons are not entitled to social or political equality with white persons, they shall have the right to acquire, own, and dispose of property, to make contracts, to enjoy the fruits of their labor, to sue and be sued, and to receive protection under the law in their persons and property. So during slavery, black Negroes talked about their husbands and their wives, but technically they didn't have them in the eyes of the law, and it wasn't until after they were free that their marriages were actually respected, because a husband or wife was regularly sold off to different plantations, especially as a means of punishment in antebellum South and during slavery time. And so after that, they finally had the right to actually marriage. So black families actually getting married and having their marriages honored and respected didn't even come till after the Civil War. And they even said in South Carolina explicitly that even though now you can own land and yada 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 yada, you can own land, you can buy land, you can do this, you can do that, you're still not equal to the white man. That's basically what they said. Florida forbade colored and white persons, respectively, from intruding upon each other's public assemblies, religious or other, and public vehicles set apart for their exclusive use, under punishment of pillory or stripes or both. Um, Segregation. You got the black church, you got the white church, you got the black this, you got the white this, you got the black this, you got the white this, and that's why you see during the civil rights era that push for integration, because it was at this time this extreme segregation came about. It was already there because of slavery, but codified. Um, the Negro had no rights before then, so with these black codes, and after the Civil War, this segregation was law. And so what you see after that with integration, it was a direct pushback against this. Very generally, Negroes were prohibited or limited in their ownership of firearms. You couldn't even own a gun. Yeah, that's expected. Because you know what you're going to do with it. What they think you're going to do with it. If they abusing you and you got a gun, you might take retribution. And they saw how valiantly, I'm doing a video on that. They saw how valiantly the Negroes fought in the Civil War, that they realized that, oh, wait a minute, these guys got guns, that these guys got organization, they'll handle that business. So they restricted your firearm use. In Florida, for instance, it was unlawful for any Negro, mulatto, or person of color to own, use, or keep in possession or under control any Bowie knife, dirk, sword, firearms, or ammunition of any kind, unless by license of the county judge or probate, under a penalty of forfeiting them to the informer and of standing in the pillory 1 hour, or be whipped not exceeding 39 stripes or both, at the discretion of the jury. So one of the things, if a Negro was caught with a weapon and somebody snitched on him, they would get the weapon. So it was like an incentive program, right? You catch a Negro with a gun, you snitch on him. If you snitch on him, then you'll get the gun. So that was a specific thing done so that the Negro cannot defend himself, flat out. Anytime anybody want to keep firearms out of your hands, it's not so much to keep down crime. I understand how people talk about you want to keep guns out the hands of criminals, but this wasn't about limiting crime. It was about preventing them the ability to defend themselves. They wanted them defenseless, so that if anything happened, if some type of riot or war jumped off again, they could just slaughter them, or they would easily win. If you got all the guns, you have the superior firepower, you're most likely going to win. Alabama, okay, now we're getting into my ancestor, where my ancestor was at. Again, I love reading anything about Alabama at this time, because it gives me more context into my specific history. I love ancient history, but I love my history. That's why I'm reading this to you guys. You have to know your history. It's good to know about Egypt, Greece, Rome, even Israel. People love the Bible, right? They love reading about David and Goliath and Daniel and Solomon and Moses, Jesus. Even they love reading about this stuff thousands of years ago. They know more about Israelites being enslaved in Egypt than they know about their people being enslaved in this land. And you got to think about that. What about what your ancestors went through? And even with the whole back to Africa thing, and this whole resurgence of understanding what we were doing in Africa before slavery, which I advocate for, knowing where you come from. But what about what happened here? Because some of that is, we know that, okay, we came from the west coast of Africa. We came from Central Africa. We can even see lands that's called Negro land, where they know that they was getting a lot of Negroes from that area. And even some African tribes were getting Negroes from that area, black people from that area, and selling them away on the coast. So we know we come from a plethora of different places, and we all got mixed and mingled over here. So it'll be very difficult to determine the actual tribes that you came from. Some people can. They may say DNA can. You can figure out specific regions, but when you factor in, intermixing and being sold to this plantation, this plant, we came from a lot of different places. We got mixed up in a lot of different places. So in a lot of ways, we're an entirely new nation, like the Negro nation or the African American nation. We're an entirely new nation inside of America. So just got it. That just is what it is. So we know for sure. We can find out for sure our roots here and what happened and what took place and the names of individuals: W.E.B. Du Bois, Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, Nat Turner, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth. We know these names. We can tap into these stories. We can read their works and their literature, and we can see what they say about what we went through here. And so it's good to read what happened thousands of years ago and quasi connect to what happened thousands of years ago. But what about connecting to what happened right here? That's why I keep telling you guys, I know what was going on with my ancestor because of the works of W.E.B. Du Bois, because of the words of Booker T. Washington, because of the words of Frederick Douglass. I see. And now I can go back to at least 1848, and it's almost 200 years. I can go back to 1848, and I can extrapolate where my direct bloodline was at. I can see what was going on in that time, and I can construct the story of their life, and I can pass that on to my children. I went off on a tangent. I apologize. Alabama had a similar law making it illegal to sell, give, or rent firearms or ammunition of any description to any freed man, free Negro, or mulatto. So my ancestor, who was in Alabama at that time, he was a mulatto, so he fell under this. He was subject to this, So this is my history. A lot of you listeners, this is your history. Figure out where your people come from. Do that family tree, man. We're gonna be wrapping this up in a little bit. Mississippi refused arms to Negroes. No freedman, free Negro, or mulatto not in the military service of the United States government and not licensed to do so by the Board of Police of his or her county shall keep or carry firearms of any kind or any ammunition, dirk, or bowie knife, and on conviction thereof in the county court shall be punished by fine not exceeding $10, and pay the cost of such proceedings, and all such arms or ammunition shall be forfeited to the informer. A South Carolina Negro could only keep firearms on permission in writing from the district judge. Persons of color constitute no part of the militia of the state, and no one of them shall, without permission in writing from the district judge or magistrate, be allowed to keep a firearm, sword, or other military weapon, except that one of them, who is the owner of a farm, may keep a shotgun or rifle, such as is ordinarily used in hunting, but not a pistol, musket, or other firearm or weapon, appropriate for purposes of war, and in case of conviction shall be punished by a fine equal to twice the value of the weapon so unlawfully kept, and if that be not immediately paid, by corporal punishment. So I think that's a good place that I can stop. Again, we were looking at Black Reconstruction in America, 1860 to 1880 by the great W.E.B. Du Bois. There's more in there, okay? There's a lot more in there about the black codes. He also gives quite stirring descriptions about how the Negro fought in the Civil War. When we hear about the Civil War, we hear about the battles that were fought, and we understand that ultimately led to our freedom. But a lot of times we don't hear just how critical a role we played in the fighting. And W.E.B. Du Bois tells us some real interesting tales of the heroes, the Negro heroes that fought. Hundreds of thousands fought, and fought hard and valiant, and the record reflects how brave they fought. But a lot of us don't know that. Willing to bet a lot of you listening, I mean, you may know, but do you know the actual story? Do you know of any stories, any names, any battalions? You may know the Buffalo, Buffalo soldiers, right? Do you know anything deeper than that? I'm gonna do a video on that. I'm gonna break that down for y'all. And if y'all want more on the black codes, I'll definitely go into that. There's more information on that, but this video is already kind of long. I normally don't go this long. I normally only do 30 minutes, but I'm honestly, I'm gonna be real with you guys. I'm personally invested in Negro history, African American history on these shores because I'm directly connected to that, and I know I'm connected to that. Nobody can tell me any different. I don't have to debate it. I don't have to argue it. It's not like talking about Egypt. Well, oh, what the Egyptians black? The Egyptian weren't black. Oh, how do you know you're from the Congo? How do you know you're from Nigeria? What were you doing in the Congo? Who were you? Where were you? Yada, yada, yada. I don't have to debate this. It's proven facts. And it's history that I can still touch mentally. And it's history where I'm telling you about somebody with the last name is me. It was a Thomas Daniels Sr. alive at this time. In the same places that he's talking about. So I can touch that history. My name Matthew Daniels. I'm talking about Thomas Daniels. I can touch that history. So I wanted to stay on that point a little bit, and I'm going to do a few more videos on this because I do like talking about this. But if you want more on the black codes, let me know. And I'm, you can tell me if you want me to do the one about the Negroes fighting in the Civil War. I'm going to do it anyway, but I would like some feedback on that. So as always, family, I'm not going to hold you up any longer. As always, I hope I said something that you never heard before. I hope you learned something. And if I did say something that you have heard before, I hope I was able to give it more context. And I hope you really did appreciate this video. And I hope you appreciate the ancestor W.E.B. Du Bois for documenting this for us. So, this your brother, Matthew Daniels, a.k.a. Aunt Pooh, a.k.a. The Chosen Few, a.k.a. The Real Bookworm. I'm not a bookworm, world. I'm the real bookworm. Make sure you get it right. As always, world, may your name live on forever, and may your memory never die. Hotel. I got to do the commercial. I'm sorry. I would be remiss. Right? I would be remiss. As you guys know, I am an author. So, show your support. Suicide Note by Matthew Daniels. I wrote this. I want you guys to go out, purchase it. You can get the paperback. You can get the ebook. It's on Amazon.com, and the link is in the description, right? The link is in the description. You get Suicide Note by Matthew Daniels. You can get Thicker Than Water by Matthew Daniels. Or you can get Big Game Hunting by Matthew Daniels. Hands down, Suicide Note is my best-selling novel. So the people have spoken. This is my best one. So if you want one to start with, get Suicide Note. Again, the link is in the description. Hit the link, purchase that book, support me as a writer and an author. So again, may your name live on forever, and may your memory never die. Hotel, cheers to that.